plenty of plants. Want some more? My row is crooked. Onions for days. Hello, welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather. I am starting this weekly vlog out on Sunday, March 2nd. And I'm just now starting tomatoes. This means that I'm about 2 weeks behind of my normal planting schedule. I really like to get my frost tender things like tomatoes and peppers started in their trays by about Valentine's Day. I'm not super concerned that I'm a couple weeks late. It's really not going to make or break my season at all, especially with some of the varieties that I'm going to grow this year. I've grown many of these plants in the past. I've got quite a few new ones in here as well, but some of these that I am going to be quite dependent on being successful this year have had a great history of fruiting first, fruiting early, and really fruiting all year round. The only reason that I would really need a plant to start early and produce early is if I planted it here in the greenhouse. I really need to have the greenhouse cleared out by about August so I can think about putting in my fall and winter things. That's the whole reason that we have this greenhouse, so that we can harvest those things earlier in the season. Right now, the greenhouse is kind of filled with a whole bunch of stuff that I put in when I thought was the right time, but I think if I get my wintertime brassicas in earlier, I'll get to harvest them earlier. I do have a small seed starting space inside my house. I don't tend to use this greenhouse to start my seeds initially. Sometimes I'll start them in my house and then move them out here, but we're still getting very variable temperatures, and if we have a day without sun, this greenhouse isn't going to hold a lot of heat. So if we have cold temperatures that night or the next morning, anywhere near freezing, my baby seedlings could freeze, and I don't want that. So each one of these little cute cell trays fits 16, and 8 of these trays fit in one of these 10-20 trays. So this is a lot of plants started all at once, and I don't know that I'm necessarily going to need this many tomato plants, but I may start this many just in case and give some out to friends and family and neighbors and things. If you have made some tomato products before, like tomato sauce, it takes about 50 pounds of tomatoes to get about 7 quarts of tomato sauce. A lot of tomatoes go into some of these products that we know and love, and these are products that I don't have on my shelf because last year I had a pretty crappy tomato year. So down here at my feet I have some Coast of Maine potting soil. I'm not sponsored or anything. This was actually a viewer that made me aware of this brand. I have struggled a little bit with seed starting mixes and other potting soils in the last few years. It's just because the companies have a very high demand that they haven't really been able to catch up on since 2020. So they've been putting out soils and things, products that are not fully broken down, and there's just not a lot of available nutrition in the soil if it hasn't been allowed to compost down well. I have found that this particular soil really isn't lumped into that group. It's been very reliable, and it has started some great plants for us in the last 9 months or so. So the whole thing is going to be full of this potting soil. If you're using something like a specific seed starting mix, those don't have any kind of nutrition in them. You can use them, but you want to make sure that you're either feeding the plants or getting them into some soil that has some nutrition in it by about 2 weeks after germination. The seeds that I'm starting today can live about a month in this soil per the size of the cells. I like to say that you can get about 1 month per inch of tray size or cell size out of your seed starting trays. So we've got about a month in here, which is plenty of time for things to start warming up, considering that I started things so late. They have changed the estimated first frost date, or estimated last frost date for our area. It used to be around April 14th. If they bumped it up to April 9th, I can very distinctly remember we got a hard freeze. It was like 26 degrees, May 5th of 2020. So I'm not sad that I'm a little bit late. None of these tomatoes, I say none, maybe some of them, but most of these tomatoes are not going to be growing in my greenhouse, so they'll be out in the open. There are ways to protect them, but 26 is no joke. So it's nice that I have started this late, just in case we get a situation like that. This is a lot. 16 times 8. These will probably be plenty of plants for me. One of the things that I'm really excited to do this year is plant some more small tomatoes inside one of the green stalks that I have in my perennial garden. I recently saw on the Roots and Refuge channel that Wild Boar Farms has a new pack of really neat seeds for small space gardening. These only get to be about 1 foot to 2 feet tall and should work really well in like a green stalk setting. Some of my favorite tomatoes, my most favorite of last year, were the Tiny Tim tomatoes. I bought those from So Right Seeds and I actually had them in my pack to start this year, but I decided that I would put those away for another year and start these guys. So I'll put pictures of these different tomatoes up on the screen as I plant them. The green stalk has 5 tiers and each tier has 6 cells. So I'm gonna start 8 of each variety just in case I have some germination issues. And if I don't, well, I'll find places for them. So first one is the Dynamite Delight. I don't know anything about these tomatoes. I'm really excited to try them though. This potting soil is already moist. I had just left it outside. And it's rained a lot here lately. We're getting more rain coming up here soon too. Normally when I'm seed starting, I like to over sow and then I'll thin plants out later, but these seeds are a little bit on the spendy side for however many you get. I'm gonna try to plant wisely and conserve the seed that I have. So that was Dynamite Delight. I'm reusing some tags from last year. I know that you can wash these off, I think with rubbing alcohol or whatever. I'm just gonna cross it out. There we go. Good enough for me. Next is Canary Kiss, Raspberry Burst. This one's called Limelight. Emerald Flame. And at this point, that's 5 varieties for the green stalk. There are 2 more varieties that I am gonna start just because I don't wanna miss out on them. I will definitely find places for them. The fact that these are small plants really helps me be able to find spaces for them. Next one is called Golden Hour. And then I'm really intrigued by these. These are the Mini Marzanos. This one here is another Wild Boar Farms variety, Berries Crazy Cherry. We grew these last year for the first time. The ones that I grew here in my greenhouse didn't do that awesomely, but the ones that my daughter grew outside in her garden were amazing. And so we're gonna start some more of these. These tomatoes don't only grow in a really, really cool fashion. Like, this is what the trusses of fruit look like. They're very, very good flavor. Some yellow tomatoes, they're just disappointing. We've got that's really good. And then I have a tomato variety that volunteers on my farm every year. I haven't seen any of the little seedlings yet popping up in the greenhouse, but we should see them coming up soon. Those are a variety called the Yellow Currant Tomato. I had originally bought those seeds from M.I. Gardner, but I planted them once and now they live here forever, all over the farm. Love it. Okay, now we're into the slicers and really the tomatoes that I'm going to be making a lot of sauces and different things like ketchup and barbecue sauce and things with. There's not very much variety here. I only have 3 different varieties that I'm going to plant. We'll start out with the heirlooms, the Belgian Giant. This is my favorite slicer tomato. It's a beautiful and big and very, very meaty. There's not very many seeds in each tomato, and there's really not a lot of that like juicy, weird mucilage stuff that a lot of people don't like about tomatoes. There's a lot less of that in these tomatoes, and they have an amazing, bold, great flavor. They actually have a thicker skin on them, which isn't always pleasant when you're eating tomatoes fresh, but it's kind of nice when you are roasting them for things like sauce because it peels off really easily, like in one piece. These seeds here are a little bit older, so I'll use these. This is also another tomato that I have seen volunteer on my farm, and every time I save seeds, I feel like the plants get healthier and just a lot more disease resistant, a lot more pest resistant, and that's really true of basically any plant. There are certain conditions that plants get accustomed to wherever they are grown. And if you keep back successions of generations, you're gonna get a plant that can really withstand your specific climate. Next, we've got some seeds that I saved from last year, the Dr. Weish or Dr. Witchy tomato. Out of all the new tomato varieties that I had started last year, new to me, tomato varieties that I started last year, this was my favorite. It was a lot like the Belgian Giant as far as size and the texture on the inside, nice and meaty, very few seeds, but it did have a different flavor. This is an orange tomato and it has a more bright, kind of citrusy type flavor than the Belgian Giant, which is a little bit more like of an umami. These Dr. Witchy tomatoes were my favorite to eat fresh. Amazing flavor. Great with just a little bit of salt. Doesn't need anything else. That's a good tomato. And also, these were some of the healthiest plants that I grew in my greenhouse. I had a lot of issues in my greenhouse last year, and really probably none of it was variety related, to be honest. I had some new soil and some really intense bug issues last year. I'm surprised anything survived. These plants did the best, and so hopefully by saving some seeds back, we will have made them a little bit more adapted to the conditions here, and that's good. Now I want to say last but not least, but it kind of is, to be very honest. Lastly, I do have this hybrid tomato that I really do like. It's a lot more of, it's not super special, let me just say that. They're fine, they're good tomatoes, they're very reliable, and they're very good, especially when they're cooked down in sauce. But these are the Heat Master tomatoes. This is a determinate tomato. Probably these ones that I got from Wild Boar Farms, these new varieties that stay small, these are very likely determinants as well. The other big tomatoes that we planted, the Belgian Giant and Dr. Witchy's, those are indeterminate, so they're going to grow really, really tall, and they're going to produce their fruit over the length of the season. These guys, honestly, they do too, but they stay a determined height. They stay about 4 feet high. They don't get super, super tall, even if you were to prune them. Really, with determinants, it can be a detriment to prune them. I do prune my determinate tomatoes, but mostly I prune them just to create airflow. But if you prune off the productive parts of the plant, and we'll get into this as the season progresses, with determinants, you will likely lose some of the yield. These guys though, when I first planted them, this was in 2022, but I expected them to put on their tomatoes all at once. I would have a big canning day, and that would be that. That is not what happened. These tomatoes were the first ones to put on their blossoms, first ones to put on their fruit, first ones to ripen their fruit, and then they kept setting blossoms all season long. I had grown them here in the greenhouse, and they just kept pumping out different flushes of blooms and creating even more tomatoes. So just because you buy a determinate tomato variety and you hear all the time that you're going to get, you know, a set amount of fruit off of that plant, that might be true, but it might be a lot of fruit that plant can genetically set. So these guys are really good, just like production variety tomato that really does hold up very well to the heat. I had grown them in the greenhouse before I had fans, and they were awesome. They withstood a very, very hot summer that we had that year. We actually had a drought. It was a lot. That summer was crazy. So if we get some crazy heat that tends to make the blossoms drop on some of my other tomatoes, these guys should kind of help pick up the slack. I'm going to start way too many of these. Like I said, I will be giving some away, I'm sure. The year that we grew these the first time, I think I had 30 plants, which is about what we'd get if all of these germinate, and I was up to my eyeballs in tomatoes. It was a good thing. It was a little bit overwhelming, so I will probably give some of these plants away. Alrighty, all the tomatoes are in. Better late than never. Good morning, girls. Seems like the bottle feeding is working. You guys coming right up to me. Come here. Come here, come here, come here. Come here, little girls. Come here, little girls. Come here. Look. baby. Come out here. Oops. Oops, oops, oops. Here we go. I know some people are probably going to ask, why don't your kids help you bottle feed? They do, and they will. Right now they're inside doing school. Alright, crazy. Oh, goodness. Oh, you done? So the goats are going through about 100-ish ounces of milk every day. Want some more? This amount will increase. Y'all are getting far more social. Let's see why. She's still a little bit skittish. She was the worst. Good morning, sweet girls. Talia's babies are 2 days old. Today looks like it's gonna be a very nice day, and then tomorrow it's gonna rain. I'd really like to get Talia reintegrated with the herd as fast as possible. The longer you wait, seems like the harder they fight. I don't really want them to spend all day tomorrow while they're cooped up inside because of the rain fighting, so I guess we'll let them do it today. There you go, ma'am. It's mainly just these three. They kind of fight for dominance, and she's been able to touch nose to nose with the other girls, but it doesn't seem to matter. If they're separated at all for really any length of time, even just overnight, you put them back together, they've got to figure out who's boss again. I'm actually going to bring them out this way where there's a little bit more space for them to do this without hurting any babies. Come here. Have a tour. You're a good girl. Don't want them fighting by the babies. Come on out, girls. Good job. You guys are right. One of our rabbits named Rosette had babies a couple of days ago, and I haven't gotten to counting them. They're really pretty. I believe this pattern is called Harlequin. Gorgeous. Gorgeous fur. It's a little bit hard to see on the little baby bunnies, but they're essentially brown with this like black speckling, sometimes with a little bit of white. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. That one's pretty. 5, 6, 7. I think that's it. Beautiful litter of 7. They all look fat and happy. Those pretty babies. Okay, there's Mama. She's the harlequin coloration. You guys need some water this morning? Good morning. It is a very blustery day today, and it's going to get more windy a little bit later. So I have all the sides down in the greenhouse. That's why I have to have the fans on, because it's also sunny and I don't want to bake while I am putting in the thing that is going to basically fill the entire greenhouse this summer. So I just got a huge box of onions from Dixondale Farms. There's 3 different varieties. I have brought a whole bunch of the red onions out here because I'd love to plug them in this bed today. They did say that I could take up to 3 weeks to plant the onions that were sent to me, which is great. I have 8 plus 6, I have 14 beds in the greenhouse, and every single one of them, I've got more than that. I've got 15 beds in the greenhouse, and 14 of them are going to at least contain some onions, and that is going to take me a very long time to plant. So I want to get this whole bed planted today. They did give me a little info pack, a little pamphlet with my onions. It told me that they should grow within a certain pH range, around 6.5. So I have this little pH meter. I don't know how accurate it really is, but the reading that I'm getting from the soil that I have in this particular bed is 7.8, which is about 1 number too high. It's a little bit too alkaline. As we were talking, it just went down to 7, but that's still a little high. And their suggestion, if your pH is a little high, is to amend with some sulfur. So I have that. Sulfur actually can keep away certain pests from the plants too, so I feel like this is a win-win. One of the suggestions that they had for planting, which I think was an awesome one, was that if you wanted to grow your onions to standard size, you wanted to plant them about 4 inches apart. And this just allows the bulb to get to its maximum capacity. But if you wanted to harvest some of them as green onions, you could plant them 2 inches apart, and then midway through the season, pluck out every other onion, preserve or cook with your green onions, and then the ones that are left behind are the ones that are going to get to full size. I ordered a ton of onions. I had done some math. I have a little program that I use to do my garden plan. It's called Hortisketch by Garden Savvy, and it looked like I could get about 85 plants per bed if I were to plant them 4 inches apart. And then within all the beds in the greenhouse, that's a lot of plants. So I looked up the price of those plants on Dixondale, and really it wasn't that much more expensive to essentially double the amount of plants that I got. So I decided I would give some away to locals, and I could also plant them closer and get some green onions. So I only want to go about 1 inch deep and put them in, just like that. I have grown quite a few onions in the past. Normally I go to the local farm store and get the onion sets. They look like little baby onions, and really that is what they are. Onions they're called biennial, so they have kind of a 2-year life cycle. This year's a 1st-year plant. It's got a really tiny little baby barely anything bulb at the bottom and a lot of greens. Onion sets, the little onion bulbs that you can get at the store this time of year, those are technically in their 2nd year. They've gone dormant, and you can plant them and get onions. You're just probably going to get onions that flower, which has happened to me quite a bit in the past. And when the onion goes to flower, it puts a lot more energy into that flower and into those seeds than it does in the bulb. So I'm excited to do these first year plants, because in theory we should get a nice big bulb. As the plant essentially prepares to overwinter, we're just gonna eat it instead. I do have a drip irrigation system that goes in these beds. I'm trying to be mindful about where these plants are going so that I can accommodate my drip irrigation system in here. I'd really like to be able to use that system during the spring and summer. It's definitely a time saver, and that is a big deal when you've got a lot going on a homestead. That's another question that I get sort of a lot, is how can you manage doing all the things that you do? And a lot of the times I will answer, I don't. There's a lot of things that I don't do. And the things that I do, I don't necessarily do them ideally. So as an example, you'll see a lot of people, you know, rotating their chickens and their animals in pastures. There's nothing wrong with pasture rotation. It just is super time consuming, and that's one of the things that I don't do so that I can do other things. I don't milk my goats twice a day like is ideal. I get a little bit less milk because of it, but I've got more goats instead. So that's how I can kind of make up the difference. And it's a win-win, because we really do have a decent amount of pasture here. We live on 9 acres, and I need around between 20 and 30 goats to help keep my pasture down, so that we don't have to be out here managing the pasture ourselves with things like the brush hog. If we don't manage our grass, we're going to get coyotes close to our animals, and that is not good. So we essentially put the animals to work for us in that way. It's not pasture rotation, but that type of pasture management just works for us, and it's a lot less labor intensive. Systems in place like the drip irrigation that I have in the greenhouse, and strategically placed freeze-free water hydrants around the farm are two very major and very important pieces of infrastructure that really help keep things flowing nicely and running smoothly. So I don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about hoses and bailing water and things like that. It's these little things that can really add up to taking up a lot of time and energy during the day. And really, if you're just starting your homestead, mapping out and putting in water lines where you think they're going to be needed is going to be the best investment you can make on your land. My row is crooked. It's okay. Also, I would suggest starting out slow. You don't do all of this all at once very well. At least I know I wouldn't have been able to. I only started with 7 chickens and a small garden, and I mean, that was enough for me to manage at the time. Really, a lot of this, like making your own bread and cheeses and things, that kind of thing is difficult at first. It's something that you develop the skill for, and you can almost do it without thinking as you get really accustomed to like the procedures. But once you get really comfortable with the process of whatever you've taken up, like bread making, once you've got it down to a science, then you can add more things. It would be very hard to try to learn 5 or 6 different things all at once, because when you're learning really anything, it's time consuming. And it's also really hard to break established schedules in order to fit these kinds of things in. So baby steps is really important. But also, I don't keep a spotless house or a spotless yard. Those really aren't the places that I feel like my time is best spent. I mean, we don't live in filth or anything like that, but I don't try to have a Better Homes and Gardens kitchen. Those kinds of things don't bring me peace and joy. I mean, I like a clean house. There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't want to spend the time that it would require to keep it like that. When we live on a farm, it is what it is. We have 4 children that spend hours and hours outside every day, dragging in all kinds of mud. I'm not mad about that. It's a great thing. But we've just accepted that we live with a little bit of mess because we live on a farm. We live in the middle of agriculture farmland, which when they get the big tractors and things out, it gets pretty dusty. So we do what we can to keep up, but I don't break my back to try to keep everything super duper tidy and clean. And also, I know you don't see it a whole lot because it's not something that I feature super often on my channel, but I have a lot of help with my family. The kids have a lot of the farm chores, and my husband does a whole lot inside and outside of the home. Whenever he comes home from work, he essentially has children duty, and he'll get them ready for bed. And on the weekends when he's home, he actually has long weekends every single weekend, and he takes over things like homeschooling when he's home. We just sort of divide and conquer where our strengths are. He's not great at gardening. He's not great at dealing with the goats. He doesn't know what to look for as far as things of concern with the animals, besides probably the obvious things. So yeah, divide and conquer, multitasking is a big part of it. But I think the most important thing is having grace with yourself, not worrying about if everything is perfect. Good is okay. It doesn't have to be ideal at all. And if you're finding that maybe you are starting to lose the joy and the love of the thing, maybe it's time to take a step back, see what you can lay down. Because I mean, there are times when you kind of trudge through the hard spots, because this isn't all, you know, candy canes and rainbows all the time. But you'll know, like, if you are overwhelmed and kind of overworked with a thing that is supposed to be bringing you a lot of gratification and joy, and that gratification and joy is consistently not there, you know, over time, it's probably time to evaluate and figure out how you can switch things up. It doesn't have to be permanent, but just until you feel a little bit better or get ahead on things. That is sort of what these onions are for me. Last year, putting in these raised beds in the greenhouse and filling them, and then dealing with all of the horrible insects that just infested my plants last year, that was a lot of mental and physical work for not a lot of yield. I did not get very much out of this greenhouse last year, not for the size of the planting space in here. And so I decided this year I was going to plant something that seemed to be relatively pest resistant. There are pests that onions deal with, that's for sure, but they also do repel some of the main pests that we had in here, like aphids and whiteflies, and they also tend to draw nitrogen out of the soil, and excess nitrogen in the soil is one reason that you can see a lot of those kinds of pests. So it's not that these onions won't potentially need amending with some nitrogen. I did buy some along with these little plants, but at least at first I'm hoping that they're gonna soak up some nitrogen and hopefully do some work for me in balancing things out while also creating a food that I buy all the time. For years, I didn't want to grow things that I could get pretty easily at our local store. We shop at a local Amish store. They only ever have, as far as fresh things, reliably they have iceberg lettuce, carrots, potatoes, and onions. Sometimes they have celery. Usually they have a little bit of garlic and ginger, but that is it. That is it for like fresh vegetables. They usually will have certain fruits like lemons, oranges, bananas, and apples. And so we get those as well. But yeah, I buy onions all the time. I love onions. I love green onions. Put them on everything. So I figured if I could grow something that I know my family eats, preserve it for a long time, and have it work for me in the garden this year, then that's gonna hopefully take a load off of my shoulders and I can focus on some other things. I am going to be growing quite a few tomatoes. We started those in the beginning of this video, and I'd really like to be able to kind of rest easy knowing that the greenhouse is doing its thing somewhat on its own, and I can pay attention to my tomato crop, which I'm kind of counting on this year. They do have tomatoes at that store as well, but they just increased the price to $4 a pound, and they're big tomatoes. They're probably 12 to 14 ounces each. So each tomato is up to about $4 each for one tomato. Remember, I said it takes about 50 pounds of tomatoes to come up with 1 quart of sauce. It really is too good to grow your own if you can. Hello, it's actually been a couple days. It is now Thursday, and I didn't get to show you all of the onions that I bought. This bare patch is because of the bed that we just planted. But as you can see, there's still a lot of onions. I've got way more red. These are yellows here. And then there's some white onions. Onions for days. So yeah, I'm about to go out and plant yet another bed of onions. I'm really excited for this season. Now, I am in no way, shape, or form an onion growing expert. I need all the help that I can get. So if you have any advice, I did ask this already before, but I'm gonna ask it again because this is a lot of onions. I would really like to have at least a little bit of a measure of success with them. So I truly appreciate it. I'll see you guys again soon.